I was sprawled across the icy hardwood floor in the heart of my brother Logan's extravagant graduation celebration, both arms wrapped protectively around my 8 months pregnant belly as a sudden gush of warm liquid told me my water had just broken. Standing over me was my own father, Arthur, his expression twisted with fury as he stared down at my capsized wheelchair, enraged because I had just told him, in front of his wealthiest friends, that I would not hand my late grandfather's house over to his favorite child. The party's music kept thumping in the background, and somewhere in the crowd of stunned onlookers, my mother, Brenda, had pressed her hands to her face out of pure social humiliation, rather than rushing to help her dying grandchild. My father assumed a daughter in a wheelchair would never dare cause a scandal at his event. What he didn't know was that my husband, Noah, had just walked back through the front entrance, and that the silent alert I had triggered on my smartwatch was about to bring his entire world crashing down. I'm safe now. But reliving this took everything I had. To feel a little less alone while I tell it, let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is wherever you are. Knowing you're out there means more than you realize. My name is Emma, and if you happen to spot me cruising along the sun-baked streets of Austin, you'd probably assume you were looking at a woman with her whole life completely figured out. I run a successful design business from home. I live in a bright, airy house I love, and my brain never stops generating new ideas. But beneath that composed, self-sufficient surface sits the steel frame of my wheelchair, the constant companion that has anchored me since childhood. A severe, worsening spinal disorder was diagnosed when I was only 7 years old. While the other girls my age were learning to pedal bicycles and chase each other through sprinklers on blistering Texas afternoons, I was busy figuring out how to navigate a world that hadn't been designed with me in mind, calculating ramp angles, dodging curbs that were too steep, and managing a dull, ever-present pain that throbbed across my lower back like a static hum that never switched off. As a kid, I clung to the idea that family meant something sacred, that blood ran thicker than anything else, that parents were supposed to be your shield against a cruel world, and that home was meant to be a refuge. The truth inside my parents' house told a completely different story. To Arthur, I wasn't a child worth adoring or protecting. I was a flawed investment, a wound to his oversized, fragile ego. Arthur lived for appearances. As a powerful corporate executive, he expected flawlessness from everyone and everything around him. And a daughter who couldn't walk, who needed costly appointments, intensive physical therapy, and an accessible van, simply didn't fit the polished image he wanted the world to see. I learned quickly to disappear, to stay tucked away in back rooms whenever his colleagues showed up for dinner parties or backyard barbecues, hidden like an embarrassment he wished didn't exist, but life wasn't entirely cruel to me. 5 years ago, I met Noah, and calling him life-changing would be an understatement. He completely redefined what it meant to be truly seen by another person. There was no trace of pity in the way Noah looked at my wheelchair, and none of the icy disdain I'd grown used to from my father. He saw my sense of humor, my drive, the parts of me that had nothing to do with how I moved through the world. When he married me, the extra planning a simple dinner out required never bothered him. His love was steady and unconditional in a way that finally let me feel whole. When we learned I was carrying our first child, a son, Noah was overjoyed. Every night he'd rest his palm gently on my stomach and murmur quiet promises to our unborn boy about the safe, joyful life waiting for him. I genuinely believed that with Noah beside me, I had finally broken free from the poison of my upbringing. Keeping a healthy distance from my parents felt like enough to protect the fragile happiness I'd built. I had no idea that the greed simmering inside my biological family was simply waiting for the right public moment to detonate, and that it would eventually push them towards something unforgivable. To understand how deep that trap went, you need to understand how differently my younger brother Logan was treated growing up. 2 years younger than me, tall, athletic, and possessing exactly the kind of effortless charisma my father loved showing off at the country club, Logan became the center of gravity in our household the moment he was born. Whenever he wanted to play elite travel baseball, my parents somehow found thousands of dollars for premier coaches, exclusive summer camps, and top-shelf gear, even if it meant pushing back the physical therapy sessions my doctor had insisted were essential for preserving what mobility remained in my upper body. I learned early on to stay quiet, take up as little room as possible, and accept whatever scraps of attention came my way while Logan soaked up the spotlight. Everything escalated 3 years ago when my mother's father, Thomas, passed away. Grandfather Thomas was the only person in that family who ever truly saw me. He'd sit beside my chair on his porch for hours, telling stories from his younger years, always praising my creativity and my sharp mind. He also understood exactly what kind of shallow, controlling man his son-in-law was. He'd watched Arthur's resentment toward my disability fester for years and worried about what would happen to me once he was gone. So when his will was finally read, it detonated like a bomb in my father's plans. Bypassing Arthur entirely, Grandfather Thomas left his fully paid off $450,000 ranch property in the Austin Hills along with a $150,000 medical trust directly to me. The day that will was executed, the temperature in my parents' house dropped to absolute zero. Arthur was livid, convinced that as the head of the family, all wealth should pass through him first, and that Logan, the male heir carrying the family name, was the rightful owner of that property. He stood in the middle of my living room, looked down at me in my chair, and told me a woman who couldn't even walk had no business owning acreage, that I was being selfish for robbing Logan of his financial future. That was the moment the slow, suffocating guilt campaign began. For 3 straight years, my mother called me in tears nearly every week, describing how stressed my father was, how Logan's dream of attending a prestigious, out-of-state university was slipping away because of tuition costs, and how I alone could spare the family the humiliation of financial strain. I was so hungry for their approval, so desperate for one moment of pride from my father, that I let them grind me down. Noah urged me repeatedly to draw a hard line, but the trauma baked into me since childhood made me too weak to hold one. I agreed to start funding Logan's lifestyle out of my own inheritance. Across those 3 years, I quietly wired roughly $80,000 of my trust into my parents' accounts, covering Logan's upscale off-campus apartment, his textbooks, his premium meal plan, even a European trip he insisted was crucial for his professional network. Every transfer felt like I was purchasing peace, telling myself that once Logan finished his degree, my family would finally view me as their savior instead of their burden. I drained my own financial cushion for a brother who never bothered to call and thank me, and for a father who still looked at my wheelchair with contempt. I genuinely thought $80,000 was the final price for their approval. I had no clue their greed wasn't something money could satisfy. It was a bottomless pit determined to consume everything I had left, including the roof over my family's head. The Texas air on the 6th of June was heavy with the smell of catering trays and pricey floral centerpieces. My parents had spared no expense for Logan's graduation party. He'd just finished his degree, and Arthur had spent the previous month transforming our enormous backyard and open-concept living space into a showcase venue. More than 100 guests, corporate colleagues, local politicians, country club friends, mingled with wine glasses in hand, while a live jazz trio played in the background. I was 8 months along, my ankles swollen, the heat aggravating my chronic spinal pain. Noah had stayed glued to my side all afternoon, fixing my cushions, fetching water, until I asked him to run to the car and grab the orthopedic back brace I'd accidentally left in the trunk. "Be right back, sweetheart," he murmured, kissing my cheek. "Don't move. 5 minutes tops." The instant he disappeared through the front doors, a heavy shadow fell over me. I was near the edge of the great hall, where glass doors opened onto the crowded backyard, when I saw Arthur and Logan walking straight toward me. Logan still wore his graduation sash, smug satisfaction plastered across his face, while Arthur's eyes carried a cold, terrifying focus. He made no attempt to pull me aside or lower his voice. He stood right there, a few feet from his own corporate colleagues, sipping drinks nearby. "Emma," he said, his tone low and commanding, "we're finishing this today. Sign it." He pulled a thick stack of papers from his jacket and dropped it onto my lap. At the top, bold letters spelled out a quitclaim deed, a legal document handing complete ownership of my grandfather's $450,000 ranch to Logan for the price of nothing. "Dad, what is this?" I whispered, my pulse pounding. "I already told you I'm not signing the house over. I'm 8 months pregnant, Dad. Noah and I are raising our son in that home. It's his future." Logan stepped closer, his eyes burning with jealousy and entitlement, not caring who overheard. "You don't need a house with acreage, Emma. You're in a chair. You and Noah can get a simple apartment. That property belongs to the male heir, the one funding new ventures in Houston. Stop dragging this family's name down." "I'm not signing it," I said, raising my voice, scanning the room for anyone who might notice my father's aggression. 10 feet away, my mother watched us. Our eyes met for one fraction of a second, long enough for her to register the fear on my face, and then she deliberately turned her back, clinking glasses with a neighbor, choosing to ignore my silent plea entirely. "You will sign it, Emma," Arthur hissed, leaning in close enough that his body blocked the guest's view entirely, his face flushing a furious red. "I paid for your doctors. I paid for that chair. I am the head of this family, and you will not humiliate me in front of these people by refusing to help your brother." "Let go of my chair!" I shouted, pushing against his hands with whatever strength my arms had left, desperately trying to protect my stomach. "Open your eyes. I already gave you $80,000. Leave me alone." A few nearby guests turned their heads at the sound of my scream. The realization that he was making a scene at his own perfect event shattered whatever restraint Arthur had left. He no longer cared that 100 witnesses stood just beyond those glass doors. In a blind surge of rage, he seized the left side of my wheelchair and violently flipped it over. The room spun. Before I could brace myself, my pregnant body slammed into the hard floor of the hall. The impact sent a blinding jolt of pain shooting through my damaged spine. I rolled onto my stomach, gasping, the force of the fall tearing through my core. A moment later, warm fluid soaked through my dress and pooled beneath me on the polished wood. My water had broken a full month early, triggered by the violence of the assault. I lay there clutching my belly, crying out as the first contraction tore through me in front of an utterly silent, horrified crowd. The sudden hush that swallowed the room felt heavier than the pain itself. The jazz music outside faded into background noise as more than 100 pairs of eyes locked onto me lying on the floor, my cheek pressed to the cold wood, watching the wheels of my overturned chair still spinning uselessly. For one heartbeat, the frightened 7-year-old still inside me wanted to beg my father to understand what he'd just done, wanted to cry out to my mother frozen at the edge of the crowd. But as another wave of contraction pain locked my belly into a hard, agonizing knot, something cold and clear settled over my mind instead. I looked up. My father wasn't kneeling to check on his grandchild. He wasn't calling for help. His face had collapsed into pure panic, not for me, but for his shattered reputation in front of his business associates. Logan stood frozen beside him, hands trembling against his sash, muttering, "Dad, everyone saw that. What did you do?" Neither one reached for me. They were disgusted that my body had ruined their flawless event. In that instant, whatever loyalty I still owed them as their daughter quietly died. My tears hardened into resolve. My survival and my son's depended on finally seeing these people for exactly what they were. I didn't waste energy crying out for their help anymore. Using every bit of strength left in my upper body, I quietly raised my left arm toward my chest. My father was too busy stammering excuses to his nearest colleague to notice. I pressed my thumb against the side button of my smartwatch. The emergency shortcut I'd set up months earlier, because of my high-risk pregnancy and spinal condition, one that instantly dialed 911, broadcast my exact location, and began recording audio to a secure cloud server. The screen flashed red in total silence. I said nothing. I simply rested my head against my arm and let the watch's microphone capture everything. The gasps of horrified guests, the frantic whispering of my father and brother, worrying aloud about job offers and reputations. My family assumed my disability made me powerless, that they could shove me around and shame me into silence. But as the distant wail of sirens started cutting through the Austin hills, I knew the trap had finally closed. I gritted my teeth through another contraction and held onto that recording like a weapon, waiting for the law to do what I no longer could. The front doors slammed open hard enough to silence every murmur left in the room. Noah sprinted in, the back brace falling from his hands the second his eyes found me on the floor, his face drained of all color. He slid to his knees beside me, hands shaking as he hovered over my face. "Emma! Oh God, Emma!" he choked out, voice cracking with terror at the sight of my overturned chair and the pool of fluid beneath my dress. "My water broke," I managed, gripping his sleeve as another contraction seized my entire torso. Noah looked up at Arthur and Logan with a fury I'd never seen in him before, then rose, shielding me with his body. Arthur stepped forward, hands raised, his composure crumbling under the weight of every watching guest. "Noah, listen, it was an accident. She got dizzy from the heat and lost her balance. She fell on her own." "Shut your mouth!" Noah roared, his voice slamming off the high ceiling like thunder. "Don't you dare look at her! Don't you dare speak to her!" Before Arthur could spin another lie, sirens shrieked into the driveway, red and blue light flooding through the towering windows. Because my watch had flagged a medical and domestic emergency, Austin police and a full paramedic team had bypassed the gate entirely and rolled straight onto the lawn. 4 paramedics rushed in with a gurney and emergency bags, shoving past stunned country club guests, 2 uniformed officers right behind them, expressions grim. The entire celebration had ground to a complete halt. No one was drinking or laughing anymore. Over 100 of Austin's most influential people stood frozen, watching an executive's pristine household turn into a crime scene in real time. "She's 8 months pregnant," Noah shouted to the medics, his voice shaking. "Her water broke because she was assaulted, and she has a serious spinal condition." As they fitted a cervical collar around my neck and checked my vitals, I reached out and grabbed the forearm of the responding officer. "It wasn't an accident," I said, my voice steady despite everything. I lifted my wrist and unlocked the recording on my watch. "My father flipped my wheelchair because I wouldn't hand my inheritance to my brother. It's all right here." The officer pressed play and Arthur's voice exploded into the silent hall, unmistakable and damning. "You ungrateful, broken little brat, sign it!" Followed by the crash of my wheelchair hitting the floor and my own breathless scream. Logan went pale as a sheet, stumbling backward into a catering table, realizing in that instant his entire future had just evaporated. Arthur tried one last time, his voice cracking. "Officer, you need to understand the family situation here." "Sir, step back and put your hands behind your back," the officer said flatly, unclipping her handcuffs. Right there, in his own grand hall, surrounded by politicians, board members, and neighbors, my father's wrists were locked in steel. The click of those cuffs was the most satisfying sound I've ever heard. As paramedics wheeled me down the hallway toward the ambulance, officers marched my father out right behind me, cutting straight through the crowded driveway. I caught a glimpse of my mother standing beneath the white event tents, hands over her face, sobbing, while her friends openly filmed Arthur being shoved into the back of a police cruiser for assaulting his pregnant, disabled daughter. Logan stood frozen on the porch, his career over before it had even begun. The sterile lights of the delivery room at St. David's Medical Center were a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just left behind. For 14 exhausting hours, my body fought through high-risk premature labor while the medical team carefully monitored every fluctuation in my blood pressure because of my spinal condition. Noah never once let go of my hand, his knuckles white, whispering encouragement through every contraction. At 4:12 in the morning, the tense quiet shattered with the loudest, most beautiful sound imaginable, our son's first cry. Despite the trauma, despite the fall, my baby boy Liam arrived completely healthy. Holding him against my chest, I felt the weight of everything finally lift. The cycle was broken. He was safe. He would never know the conditional, transactional version of love I had spent my whole life trying to survive. While I recovered with my newborn son, the legal system moved fast. The recording, the witness statements, and the medical reports left Arthur without a defense. Local news picked up the story within days, and the consequences landed hard. Arthur was charged with aggravated assault against a pregnant woman, the evidence laying bare both my vulnerability and his financial motive. 6 months later, he was sentenced to 20 years in state prison with no chance of early release. The man who once had it all lost everything in a single afternoon. Logan's job offer evaporated the moment the scandal broke. His reputation gone overnight, and he and Brenda were eventually forced to sell off their assets just to cover legal bills, ending up broke and isolated in a small rented apartment. These days, I sit on the back porch of the ranch house my grandfather left me, the warm Texas wind moving through the oak trees while Noah laughs nearby, helping our son Liam wobble across the grass on his first steps. My family thought my disability made me an easy target, but they never understood that real strength lives in the heart and the mind, in the will to protect the people you love. I lost a father and a brother who never deserved me, but I gained something so much bigger, a home filled with safety, love, and peace. I never imagined this kind of happiness was possible on the other side of that nightmare. Their greed buried them. Love and justice built something better for the rest of us. Do you think the punishment matched what he did, or would you have handled it differently? Tell me in the comments, and if this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like it every single day. Thank you for being here.